Welcome to the Carrier's Edge Inside Webinar series. For this edition, we are looking at learning management systems. I'm Jane Jazrawi. I'm the CEO of Carrier's Edge, and I feel like I'm doing a podcast, Mark, because with me, as always, is Mark Morrell, who is the president of Carrier's Edge. And we were talking about this a little bit last night because we were recording our podcast. So if you're interested in more of this information, then you can check out our podcast. You can find it on our website under resources. You can also follow us on X and LinkedIn and YouTube. So our podcasts are also posted on YouTube. So what I'd like to do first is talk a little bit about why we're talking about learning management systems. It is I don't know, is it not quite as sexy as technical training? I don't know which one of those things are more attractive, but learning management systems has been your life for a very long time, Mark, right?
It has, yes. And it's funny, you mentioned that it feels like a podcast. And I think in the 10 years that I've been doing the monthly webinar series, I think this may be the first time that it's just been the two of us doing one of these things. And it is definitely the first time that I've ever been the guest on my own webinar series, which is very weird.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting is yeah, I know. I think this is the first time you've been the guest, but you know way more about learning management than I do because my expertise has always been in actually creating courses and how you write a course, how you put it together, whereas you have always been kind of in the background
Mhm.
and with the framework of how online learning actually sits on the internet and how you access it and how you find the information that you need and all of the things outside of a course. And you've been
Mhm.
working on that for, I hate to tell you,
25 years now.
25
Yes.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, hiding in the background where I prefer to be is where the learning management system is, sort of in the in behind everything or underneath it, depending on how you draw your diagrams. But yeah, I built my first designed and built my first learning management system, or what would count as a very rudimentary learning management system, in 1999, back when we were in the world of CBTs, and all of the courses that you were building were deployed on CD-ROMs or on executables that were just shared in an internal network. But we still had to track who was doing what, and who was completing courses and verifying that it was completed. So I had to build a system that would allow us to do that and print out certificates and have a centralized storage of results. So yeah, I've been at this for a long time and been building, I think Carrier's Edge is the fourth major learning management system that I've built, all very different. But yeah, you learn a lot each time, that's for sure.
Well, let's go back because one of the things that you said, you built it your first one in 1999, or you started working on them in 1999. Learning management is not, I don't think it's new. I don't think it's necessarily, a new concept. But when you don't have, what happened was in the 90s, you stopped having the four walls of a classroom. So in a classroom, you have learning management. You manage the content that you're going to do. You give people tests. You mark the tests. You have a whole record system of who did what on the tests. You know who did the test because you have the piece of paper that's there. You have a
Mhm.
filing cabinet where you keep all of this stuff. But none of that when you are doing everything online. The courses started becoming online. So you did
Mhm.
CD-ROM based courses. So you put all your e-learning on a like a CBT computer based training, and you would stick a disk in your computer. But what learning management came out of was the idea that you had to track all of this. Like, how did you know what people did If you're doing it at your own computer, unless you're in a room full of computers and people taking training, you don't necessarily know. So what were the problems? So what I would say, my first question is, what are the elements of an LMS? So if you're trying to take what you used to do in a physical classroom and put it into a learning management system, what do you need to have?
Mm. Yeah, okay. So the learning management system really has three main elements to it. One is the group of users, the people that are being trained. One is the group of courses that are being provided to those people. And one is the activity or the different things that happen when people take those courses. So the main focus of a learning management system is really, as you put it very nicely a couple of days ago, it's a matching system.
The
it's a
dating
matchmaking,
system.
yeah, it's a dating system. It's a matchmaking system between users and content. And it is primarily used, in the beginning, it was primarily used to keep track of who did what. So who did what when, so that you can see if you're putting out a particular course, you can see who actually finished it, who hasn't finished it, and confirm that it's all done. But as they evolved, they really grew into something much more elaborate, and that uh, sort of back end piece of tracking who did what uh, became, well, maybe not secondary, but it's kind of the second stage, because the first stage is really having a lot of powerful tools for managing who should be doing what. It isn't just who did something in the past, it's what should be happening in the future. And the learning management has evolved to really grow into something that will support what people should be doing in the future and make it easy to manage and control that.
So I'd like to go back. So now that we kind of have a framework of what it's supposed to be, um, let's go back and talk about the early ones because you've been working in learning management for 25 years and it didn't really look like it does now back in the 90s. And we were both working. When I started doing research for this particular webinar, I realized Mark and I met at a company called SoftArc back in 1995. I think I had been working there for a couple of years.
Yeah,
Mark started in 95 or 6, 95.
95.
And it was a company called SoftArc. The program was called First Class. And I'm not going to go on and on about this, but it was being used as a learning management system. And we didn't even know because we hadn't even heard the term.
Yeah,
We
the term didn't really exist. Yeah, until
then
until the dot-com craze, learning management system wasn't really a phrase that anybody used.
But universities were using it.
Hmm.
Famously, the Open University in England, which is like a free university one of the first online universities.
Hmm.
So briefly, how did that work? Like, how did people actually have learning management before there was really even an internet?
Well, that was people using dial-up modems, and sometimes people would be in a local network, but they were very different. It sort of was an outgrowth of the old correspondence course. And in the old days, some of you are old enough to remember that you would have a correspondence course and content would get mailed to you, and you complete your reading and your assignments, and you mail it back and it gets marked. And those kind of got moved into computer-based networks. And the Open University was doing something similar to that. The assignments would be posted into the system, and then people could go into the classes that they're part of, get their assignments, and go through and complete them and submit them, and the instructor would be able to mark them. So it simplified that process a little bit, it simplified the process of sending things, distributed content out to people who weren't in the building. But it was really about the content and not so much about reporting or tracking on anything that anybody did. So it was really a centralized distribution system. And that's kind of how they originally started. And that's what First Class was designed to do in the beginning. But it was later on that kind of stuff was manageable when it was modems. You didn't have a lot of people connecting at any one time. You really couldn't scale it very easily. So when the internet came along and people could start to scale things, and all of a sudden you had the ability to be reaching thousands or tens of thousands of people very quickly, all of a sudden the use case changed and the system needed to change a fair bit as well. Larger
And that
problems came up.
when yeah, and that was, and I think it exploded in the 90s when the
Mhm.
internet became a way to connect people, and educators are really good at figuring out, how to use things for their own, to benefit themselves, because you're always kind of looking around and say, oh, what can I use? What can I do with this? What can I do with this? And the internet in the 90s really became a hotbed of learning. So you ended up being at the forefront of that and worked on a big system called Saba.
Yeah, well, we worked with that a bit. Saba was kind of the first really successful commercial learning management system that came out in the late 90s. And their original their target market was enterprise. And so we'll talk in a little bit about the differences between enterprise learning management and other types of learning management. But uh, Saba, their first what was interesting about them is they had a very specific problem that they were trying to solve, and that is keeping track of distributed learning across a huge area. And the example that they used in their sales pitches or their promotion as to why they existed and their sort of initial success story was related to Ford Motor Company, and Ford was having a huge issue with all of their dealerships submitting way too much warranty work and asking for reimbursement for all of this warranty work with mechanics that weren't properly trained on the vehicles. So they were identifying things as warranties and not really doing it properly, and it was costing Ford a lot of money. So they implemented Saba as a way of keeping track of who was actually sufficiently trained at a dealership. And so they wouldn't reimburse warranty work for people who weren't trained, who weren't sufficiently trained. And
Sounds
that,
familiar.
yeah, that became a really successful project for them. And it really proved to the world that something like a learning management system could be really helpful because it helps you to stay on top of things that are happening in stretched out places that you can't always get to. You can't go there and look at paperwork. You have to have other ways of validating that people are sufficiently trained. And so it worked really well for them. And that kind of model has continued to this day, that the learning management system is used to verify compliance. I realized when I was thinking about this last night that it's very similar to what we're doing with FedEx right now, where FedEx has got all of these programs, and they've got discounted insurance programs and things like that for their contractors. But the deductible that people have to, or the deductible for insurance claims is different depending on whether the drivers are compliant with their training. So the learning management system becomes very critical in determining whether or not drivers are up to date on all their training and what the deductible should be in the case of a crash. So
But I mean, we know that insurance companies use our system all the time for compliance and
mhm.
making sure that people are doing the training that they say that they're doing. So it's not just, what FedEx is doing. I think you can look at it as a simpler model
Mhm.
where people are basically saying, no, my drivers did do this training. They are
Yeah.
trained.
Yeah. So one of the things that was kind of interesting about Saba being the first ones into the market is that it really was designed for what they saw as their sweet spot customer, which was large enterprise. So Ford is a huge customer. Other large customers they had were like regional banks that had thousands of employees, and anybody who needed to do a lot of management of training was a good customer for them. But what was very distinct about almost all of those customers is that they were all white collar people sitting in an office. And that's a very different approach than what we see in trucking. So what Saba did, not just keep people compliant, not that, the Ford example is a great success story for them. But one of the other things that they were focused on is identifying all of the jobs within a business and itemizing the training that people need in order to have those jobs. So if you want to get job X somewhere down the line, that's a promotion for you, here's the training that you need to take in order to be qualified for that. So it was a really good way for people to kind of take control of their career path within an organization by looking at their aspirations and what training was required to do that. And that was one of the areas where they started to have some real success and get some real traction, is to be put into these white collar situations where people are taking control of their own careers and wanting to get more training, wanting to explore what's out there and see, okay, well, what am I qualified for based on my current levels, and what do I need to do to get to the next level? So that was kind of the model that they ended up following, and that became the default model for what we call white collar e-learning, which is very specific.
And for that, like going further into what white collar e-learning is and the learning management that they do, um, you know, so it's self-directed. You can
Mhm.
choose the courses that you want to take. You can follow a career path.
Mhm.
Um, is there anything else that you can think of that kind of sets apart white collar e-learning?
A couple of things. There are several things that to me are immediately apparent. When I'm looking at another learning management system, I can immediately tell if it's designed for white collar for a few reasons. One is it's got a lot of text, and it takes a lot to get to the actual e-learning,
Now you're
actually
talking
get
about
into the content. Just
when you
logging into the system, you see a lot of text, and you've got to read, and you've got to go through a lot of clicks to get to where the actual content is. And
And
white
there's
collar people
usually,
will
just
do
to,
that.
let me just interrupt for a second. And it's instructions on how to use it as well, like how to
Yes.
use the entire thing.
Yes.
So here's this section is for your notes, and this section is
Yeah.
for your schedule, and this section is for,
Yes.
so this is not
Well,
something.
that's another part of it as well, is that they assume that you're going to be a very active participant in it, and you're going to take notes, and you're going to want to engage with other people. So that's a very particular audience approach. But also, they assume that the audience has got newer computers on high-speed internet in kind of in a centralized location. And they make those assumptions because most of their audience does, and it factors into how the thing performs. You need to have a good machine and a good connection in order to get good performance out of them. So those things immediately give away to me that this is a white collar design LMS. It really assumes self-directed stuff. It assumes that I'm going to go as a user, I'm going to go and hunt for courses that are interesting. And it might be a classroom course, it might be an e-learning course, but when I find something, I'm going to request that I can be part of it. And so you end up having these workflows where you can request a registration to a classroom course and it will get sent to your manager for approval, that kind of thing. Very common in the white collar e-learning world. And of course, completely unheard of in trucking or other blue collar industries treat education very differently. So there's a very different model that needs to be applied there.
So the second model, and this kind of goes back to your history as well, is work that you did for a big retail gas station chain.
Mhm.
And when you did this, there was no high broadband. Like the
No.
connection speed was not high.
No.
People were required to do things. They could had
Yes.
to do a whole bunch of stuff before they could even
Yes.
start. So let me just talk about like how did you, and I know this because I was there, but I know that we didn't realize the high-speed connection issue until it happened.
Yes. That is an assumption that the assumption that everybody has a good connection. works well in the white collar world, does not work in manufacturing, in energy, in transportation. And yes, the chain of gas stations that we were working at, very different use case because they were out in the middle of nowhere, had terribly slow connections, and had an audience that did not want to be doing that content. Is a bunch of teenagers working a shift at a gas station. They do not care. They are not looking to further their career by getting better at spill prevention. Like that's just not on their radar. So you have to approach it entirely differently. You have to have a model that tells them exactly they're required to do, kind of babysits them and says, okay, you've got this much time to do it, and you've got a requirement. You've got to have it finished by this day. Has more reporting for managers about the people that aren't doing it so the managers can follow up, and works really well on a slow connection and an older machine. And that totally changes everything.
So what things, what were some of the biggest changes that you had to make on the back end in the learning management part of the system, not the courses so much?
Well, the back end, you have to be very careful about tracking what's happening and making sure that you're not eating up a lot of bandwidth with that, because the bandwidth is needed for the content delivery. Then you also have to make it very easy for people to see what they're required to do when they get in. So it isn't a whole bunch of explanations of go here for this, go here for that. It is straight to the facts. This is what you need, and get to it now. Then you also have to make it, more controlled, and you have to constrain them so that they are actually forced to go through all of the content, to listen to all of the audio, to go through all of the checkpoint quizzes and all of that kind of stuff. In the white collar world, you don't care about that because people are there to learn. They're going to take the time. They're going to explore all of the optional things. But here you have to be very sure about things that people need to do and kind of force them into doing it. And not allow them to kind of skirt the issue, kind of find loopholes and ways around it, because they for sure will if they can. You also have to, like I said, keep it very simple, but you have to put right in their face the places that are requirements that they need to redo on a particular schedule, and like really kind of push it on them that way. And that's the biggest change.
I think that experience, which we had in the early 2000s, I was like,
Mhm. Yeah, mid 2000s,
really,
we were doing a lot of that.
well, we actually, because the connections were so bad, because what would happen at a gas station, a lot of the bandwidth that you have was reserved for communicating about fuel, right? Like
Yeah,
it
the
was
point of sale.
And so you had for any learning that was going to happen, you just had this little bit left over that you could do.
Mhm.
So the solution that we ended up coming to was kind of, I've never seen it in any other application where we had
No.
offline and online.
Yeah, so we took the learning management system and kind of split it in half, and some of it was stored locally on the machine where the courses were running. So we had a CD-ROM that would store some things locally on the machine, but then it would also send it back to a central server and manage it that way so that the head office could look at what's going on, and that the auditors who were reviewing and doing compliance audits at these stations could also go out and check and or see in advance who was finished and who was not finished before they went on site. So we had to split it up a little bit, and that's become very useful because as we moved from that market into transportation, we realized that the same kind of things are happening, that truck drivers don't have great connections, and there are places in North America where you can't get a good connection. It doesn't matter how brand new your phone is, you're still not getting a great connection. So we had to take that experience and build it into what we are doing in here so that we can balance that and have a good experience for the end user, have good data back to the head office, but also keep it running smoothly and not be, clogging up the bandwidth or using tons of data all the time.
And so So let's get to, we've talked a lot about the background of how learning management systems kind of came to be and the other types of learning management that you've worked in. So you took all of this experience when we came to build something that was for transportation. So which parts did you find were the most important elements that you had to bring from your experience and put into a transportation LMS? And I just want to mention that there weren't really any when we did.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a good question. And also, I'll preface that answer with a little bit of, the pros and cons of having a general purpose system versus something that is built specifically for an audience. And Saba that I was mentioning earlier is a general purpose system, or they try to be a general purpose system. There are other general purpose learning management systems that are out there now. There's lots of them that are great, but they are designed to cover every possible scenario. And there's also open source that we haven't really talked that much about. Uh, Open source was starting to come out when we were looking at building this. Moodle is the primary open source product. It's really designed for post-secondary, for the higher education market, which is completely different from blue collar and white collar as well. Because if it's designed for university students or college students, that's a whole different mentality. It is assuming that there's instructors in there that are monitoring the assignments and having a course that runs over multiple weeks and things like that. And there's different ways that you can do things in Moodle, but it really is based on that sort of core assumption that you've got a multi-week course that is being led by an instructor. So when we
And
started looking,
that's where you, like when you looking at Moodle, it also has things like proctored exams because that's
yes,
something that you do at a university. And
yes,
that
yeah,
whole,
it is very text-based because in university courses, everything is text-based. There's a few pictures and diagrams, but you're not getting interaction really. So it's not designed to handle that. So we were looking at what was out there, and off-the-shelf systems were really focused on white collar. Open source was in its infancy. Moodle was just starting to come up, and it really was pretty rough, and it wasn't going to be very useful. But at the same time, I built three different learning management systems for different audiences already, and I thought, well, it doesn't make sense to use anything off the shelf because they're not going to cover what we need. And we already have the core pieces here, so we might as well build what we want. And then from that, we can build things that are very specifically suited to the trucking industry, that are very specifically designed to serve what a truck driver needs versus what other people are after. And so we did that. And that's been, I think, the right decision because we've been able to do things that you would never be able to do with an off-the-shelf system. And we've been able to serve an audience that you would never be able to serve otherwise.
which is interesting. I think that's, I think the trucking industry does think it's different, but when we started working in it, we didn't realize how different. But when you start talking about the structure of an LMS, which we haven't really talked about, because you have to almost mirror an organizational structure
Mhm.
in the LMS so that mirrors what people are actually doing. So a white collar system versus a university system versus a blue collar system is all going to be very different. So
Yeah.
how did you figure out how to structure the organizational element of the LMS that you designed for trucking?
Well, it still comes down to the basics of users, courses, and activity. And so we started with that, but then we talked to fleets about how they organize their different businesses, how things are set up, and the relationship. And here's another place where trucking is very different, is the relationship between the driver, the fleet manager, the safety person, and the HR side of things. So in a white collar world, education and professional development is always driven by HR. There may be a dedicated training group, but it's kind of under HR. In trucking, when we came in, there really wasn't HR. There was safety that was directing what people were required to do, and then there was fleet managers slash dispatchers that were responsible for the drivers, that actually managed the drivers and had to sort of work that in. So you had this kind of odd triangle that had to be balanced, and we had to make sure that all of those things could be incorporated into the system and could serve the industry really well and flexibly. So that was one of the things that we built in. We talked to people about how they wanted things or what their challenges were, and saw the pieces that would fit there, and looked at our past experience to see where we could, take things we've learned from the past and apply it here and put it all together, and then just keep building on it over time, over the years. As customers use it, they make requests, or they say, this is fine, but I really have an issue with this, or it would be really helpful if we could do that. And then we build that in over time.
One of the things that we've always had built in is the ability to move users around.
Oh yeah, that happens a whole lot more. That's a good point. So in the white collar world, and even in the post-secondary world, you're not really moving people around that much because you don't need to. But in the trucking world, people could be on a different board every couple of weeks. That's not that uncommon. So you need to have the ability to track that and make it real easy for people to move from one place to another. And along with that, have all of their assignments updated to match, because now they've moved from one customer to another. They need the customer specific training. They may be moving from one region to another, so they need some different regional training. They've moved from domestic to cross-border. Now they're hauling hazmat. Like, there's a lot of different things that all need to be tracked and need to be managed there. And so that's something that we built in from the beginning, is the ability to do that kind of thing. And it's been really helpful because you have to stay on top of it. Absolutely, you have to stay on it.
And deleting users and recreating them and from one place to the other is
Yeah.
really, well, that
Yes.
ends up
Well,
being,
deleting and undeleting. Yeah,
yeah,
that's the issue, right? Drivers quit and then they come back 3 months later. And you
yeah.
need to be able to bring them back and bring back all of their history. But when they're not around, when they quit or they leave, you don't know if they're coming back. So you need to get them out of the way so that they're not clogging up your regular administration, but you still have access to all of their results in case something happens, in case there's a lawsuit or an audit, or you need to pull their records, or at some point they do come back. You need to have that kind of flexibility. And yeah, commercial systems generally don't have that because those aren't considerations in other places very much. In the white collar
Okay.
world, not an issue. Post-secondary, not an issue. Only these are blue collar specific issues.
The other thing that I think is something that we have designed that doesn't exist in other learning management systems, especially white collar education, is our programs paradigm.
Mm.
The idea that you take a set of learning materials, so courses or modules or whatever it is, and you can put them together and you can kind of package it. Because that was something that we did. We started at Suncor doing that. Is having
Yeah,
this.
that's not that uncommon to have a curriculum that you can define that includes different content. What's different here is that people will want those things to show up at different times. So you'll have a week 1 package, and then you'll have a week 3 package and a week 5 package for drivers. And you don't want all of those showing up at the same time. Again, sort of coming back to the analogy of the gas stations, and people just want the stuff they need to have. You don't want to overburden them with things that they aren't going to be doing now. So you need to have that stuff kind of hidden until a very particular time. So this week you see this, and that's your assignments, and that's it. Next week you see something totally different, and those are your assignments, or next month or next quarter, whatever the schedule is. That is something that we needed to build in to support the way the industry does training for its drivers, and particularly onboarding. For fleets that are doing onboarding, they want certain things to show up each week and keep track of who's finished them, who's behind, who's staying up to date. That's really very useful for the fleets to be able to see, but it's kind of uncommon. These are things that you don't have in other industries quite the same way.
the whole timing and scheduling and all of
Yes.
that. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
when you are doing self-directed training and you're going in and choosing your own adventure, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
like, you don't need to have it pop up, I don't want this to show up until February. Like, you
No.
don't need that.
No, in those kind of situations, what people do is make everything available. Like we'll give you access to everything and you can choose and you can pick it from there. And what you're not getting paid quite the same way in the white collar world. They're typically salaried people, and they will often be doing that education on their own time for free. So the company doesn't have to worry about it so much. But in blue collar industries, whether it's manufacturing or other places, warehousing, and people are getting paid hourly, or it's drivers that are getting paid flat rate for taking a course, or they're getting paid, in different ways. You have to be on top of that because it's way too easy to say, we're going to pay you for taking a course. And then you open up all the courses and the driver takes the same course 10 times and wants to be paid 10 times, right? If there's a loophole, people will find it.
Right.
So you have to have limitations on these things and have ways of managing that. And that's actually something that we built in early that, going back to one of the things that we talked about, what have we learned along the way? That was an early one for me, is the idea of being able to limit how many times people can do courses. In the white collar and post-secondary world, you don't really have that model. But here,
Do it as
you
many
want to
times
be,
as you want.
yeah, but here we absolutely have to have limits on these things that say if you are going to be taking this course, you can only do it twice, or you can do it twice every 6 months. You can't just keep trying it endlessly. You're going to get locked out of that. We're going to put limits on those things.
The same with testing, and
Hmm.
that's another I think in the white collar and blue collar world, they're very different in terms of testing, in terms of how you prove that you know what you've done in the course. And that's very much it feels like a content thing. It feels like well, that's part of the course. I mean, of course you have the
Hmm.
tests there, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into the administration of testing
Yeah.
and how you can prove that people have done what they said that they did.
Well, what's interesting here is, for me, is all the things you can't do. In other LMSs, we've had tests where there are final tests where you kind of have short answer, kind of like essay type questions. One of the last major system I built before Carrier's Edge was a corporate system, and it had short answer tests. So you could submit these and basically like essay questions, and somebody would mark them. There would be a designated instructor that would be marking that content. You can't do that kind of thing in trucking because people don't have time. You can't do anything where it's a fill in the blank. You can do those kind of things, fill in the blank questions in the white collar because people have got a lot more dexterity on the device. They tend to be more
Sellers.
considered when it comes to spelling and grammar. But in the transportation world, those things don't really work. So you have endless people typing it in and misspelling it and getting it wrong when it really isn't wrong. And you end up testing their spelling rather than testing whether they actually know what's going on. And so you end up having to do tests that are a very particular way, that are very particular type of design and technical structure to them in order to be consistently effective. We have a lot of people that are English as second language speakers. You don't want to be punishing them for their lack of grammar or spelling or those kind of language things when you're trying to assess whether they actually know the content. So we had to design specifically for that too.
And we do it a little bit differently than other systems where we don't have here's your one question, answer this one
Yes.
question, click next. Here's your one
Yeah.
question. Is there a reason or that you decided to do it a different way?
Um, I think it was probably in the beginning, it's certainly easier to do those, but what we've learned is that it's also actually better because people get to see the whole context of the test. And in a lot of those tests, you will see like this test where you get one question at a time. you'll sometimes get down to question 10 or 12 and realize that embedded in that question is the answer to question two.
Yeah.
And, test writers can get lazy in that way. But if you have all of the questions showing up at once, you can see the whole context. You have to write better questions, but it is a better assessment of people's knowledge. Um, and I think one of the things that we have also seen is that it's better for people to see the whole picture and be able to think about it. And for technical reasons, it is way more efficient to be able to serve out the test once and track what's happening. And we do save all of their answers. So even if they are in one of those areas with a bad connection and they're in the middle of the test and something, their connection drops or something, we still store all of that so they don't lose anything. So we have built in kind of failovers that, again, you don't build in other types of systems because you don't need to. You don't need to deal with those. So we build in the things that we need to because we need to make sure that it's a good experience for the end user. And also, one of the things we started doing early on is tracking every answer that comes in. So we don't score the test at the end and just store a 80% for the user or anything like that. We actually track every single question because one of the most valuable parts of the learning management system that people sometimes don't think about is data analytics. It's not just did somebody take a course or did they pass a test? It is what are the trends? Who's getting this question wrong all the time? And what are the questions that people struggle with? Things like that. And by storing each question and each answer response individually, we can start to run some of those analytics. So I know on the content side, we have the ability for people to look at questions that are being answered wrong most commonly and see if there's something that needs to be clarified in the options there. On the fleet side, the administrators can look at those analytics and see if there are people who need additional help, if there are subject areas where their drivers are struggling, and really drill down into the specifics and see what's going on. That's something that you don't see that much in other learning management systems. And it's less of an issue, again, when people are kind of self-directed. But with drivers who may not want to speak up and say, I don't understand, or I'm struggling with this, it's really useful to have that data to be able to identify it and then have that private conversation with them.
So but what we also find is that wording really matters for this audience.
Mhm.
And this kind of gets into content a little bit, but we get a lot of feedback on the wording of certain questions because of the way drivers interpret things or the way the administrators interpret certain things. So we get a lot of really good feedback on those tests because we let people see, or
Mhm.
because we store all that data and people can like basically do what you said and take a look at it.
Yeah, and I guess on that, they get drivers when they submit a test, they don't only get their score, they get to see each question that they got wrong and the answer that they chose. And sometimes they dispute it.
Oh
Sometimes they will
yeah.
say, I think this one is right. And that's great. It brings up some really good conversations. Most of the time, I think we end up being in the right there and they just misunderstood something, but that's useful for us as well. So it helps to really refine the effectiveness of the program overall.
One of the things, so we've talked about user management and testing the assessments. One of the, and a little bit on the training program so that you can mix and match and create curriculum for different purposes. So like maybe a safety meeting,
Mhm.
maybe onboarding, orientation. Um, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was we always, when we started our company, we wanted to not necessarily always um, be working for the biggest companies.
Mhm.
We saw that there was lots and lots of vendors that wanted to work in white collar. Like that
Mhm.
was one of the things. It's like there's tons of competition. If you want a white collar customer, then you're going to have a very sophisticated sales process. And so we decided to look at where else, who else needs e-learning? We
Mhm.
know how to do e-learning, we know how to do learning management, who else needs it? And that was kind of how we ended up in trucking. And so our LMS is designed not necessarily, I would like you to talk about the difference between white collar learning management for big companies versus blue collar learning management for smaller to mid-sized companies.
Well, that's a good point. And I think in that area, interestingly enough, blue collar and white collar aren't that different. So large company versus small company have very distinct needs, or there are different use cases. So in a large organization, you will typically have dedicated people working with the system. And those people will use that system every day. They will get used to it. So it can be clunky and difficult to manage and make not a lot of sense, but they'll get used to it and they'll figure it out. And because their job is managing the training, they will become efficient at it. That's very different from a small company where you don't have those dedicated managers. You have people who are in charge of training, but also in charge of 50 other things. And they're going to log into this system maybe once a week, maybe not even. We see sometimes smaller companies, they'll log in maybe once a month because that's when they cycle back around to having time for it. So both of those people need something very different, or they can endure something very different. The large organization can endure a system that isn't very user-friendly on the administrative side because they'll still figure it out one way or another. It's more important for them to have kind of power user features. And even if those things are complicated, they'll figure it out and they'll be able to make use of them. The smaller company cannot have that. They cannot have a system with usability issues because every time they log in, they basically have to relearn how to use that system. And it needs to be very obvious. It needs to be self-explanatory, what they should be doing, where to go to do it. And even if it doesn't have the most elaborate, complex features, that's okay because they don't have time to explore those things anyway. They need to get in there, get stuff done, and move on. And so when we designed our system, we designed that admin interface to be very simple and very usable so that when people log in immediately, they know what's going on. They can figure it out. They can make some educated guesses. We give them some guide along the way, but it is very quick for them to get in there, do what they need to do, and then get out. And there's a lot more focus on automation because when you have that hour allocated, if you can go in there and set up automation to do things for you 3 months down the road or 6 months down the road, then you don't need to be coming back in so often. On the larger company side, dedicated training managers are often actually uninterested in automation because they want to go in there and do it. Their job is to go in there and do it directly anyway. So very different audiences. And we've certainly added in plenty of what I would call power user features for the larger customers. And often they will make requests that can be baked into the system in a way that are just as usable for smaller companies as well. And the one that I think of always in this case is the request that we had, the request that we had to add a field to track the pay rate for different courses. People that pay drivers for completing different courses, they want to be able to assign a dollar value to each of those courses. And that was a great idea. And shout out to Challenger Motor Freight for suggesting it. But we added it in there, and yes, they use it, and they've got 1,000 drivers that they need to keep track of. But it's just as useful for the people with 10 drivers because they can still run those reports, and it ends up being something that helps them as well. So sometimes there's overlap in the feature requests. Sometimes there are things that are really, really good, for everybody, depending on, what their needs are.
So when you say set up automation, because you mentioned that a little while ago, what do you mean by set up automation that smaller companies want things that are automated?
Well, if they, okay, smaller company, may want to have what you would call a best-in-class driver training program. And that's going to involve training drivers, putting something out there for them on a quarterly basis, and then running reports to see who's doing it, making sure that people get it done on time, tying that into bonus programs so that you can see who qualifies for the bonus, all of that stuff. But they don't want to go into the system and be spending time to figure this stuff out. And what did we do last time? And I don't remember what it was. So I have to figure it out again. What's much more valuable for them is to be able to go in once and say, here's our program for this quarter. Here's a program for next quarter, and it's going to appear on this date and have this deadline. And here's a report, a program for another period that's going to appear automatically. And that's the kind of automation feature that we built in to allow them to sort of schedule reports, programs to show up on their own. Scheduled reporting is another thing that is kind of similar that says, well, at the end of this period, I want to report on this, or every month I want to report on that. And they can set those up and it will automatically be delivered to specific audiences. And so maybe they spend an hour in there or they spend 2 hours in there setting it up, but then it just runs on its own from there.
Then it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the reports will get generated on the schedule that they dictate. They will be sent to the people that they decide. The programs will appear for drivers. Deadlines will be configured as they have requested. All of that happens automatically. So it saves a lot of time in terms of the going back in and going back in kind of stuff.
So, I wanted to talk a lot about, or I wanted to talk about for the last thing that I wanted to focus on is how do when we have customers or potential customers who come to us and say, I want to try out your system, they focus on the courses.
Mhm.
They really like it's all about, are these courses correct? Are they, what topics do you have? Do you have it for this type of trailer, blah, blah, blah. But people don't have questions about the LMS. So if you were, if you were a potential customer, like if you were looking for a driver training system, and there are a number of them out there, what would you be looking for?
Well, I think first, people do typically ask a little bit about the LMS, but at very basic level, their thinking is, can I see who finished a course? Can I see who did this? Which is like, that's table stakes. Every single system for tracking things will have that. And there's lots of people that say they have an LMS and really all they have is basic tracking of activities. So it's not the same. So tracking stuff, activity in your HR system or a basic LMS is not the same as having a full featured system, because what you want to be looking at is, yes, it's going to track it. Everybody's going to track it. That's kind of the easy part. But the larger question is, what can you do with that? What do you do with that information after? So yes, I can see that somebody finished a course, but who is in progress in a course and taking a long time? Who is probably having difficulty with that and I need to give them some help? Like I was talking about earlier, where are the subject areas that are causing problems? Like that's the kind of stuff that the learning management really gives value on, is being able to look below the surface, not just this happened on this date, but what else is going on? How did it go? What else needs to be done after? What are the trends that we're seeing? And where are the gaps with people? But also, like I said, sort of in the beginning, it isn't just about what happened in the past. You absolutely want to drill into all of those and get the details on what happened in the past. But an LMS is really about kind of an aspirational thing. This is where it does overlap with the white collar, regardless of what the audience is. It is a bit aspirational in that it is about what should be happening. Where do we want to get to? How do we build a higher performing organization by educating people? Where are the gaps? What do we need to be doing differently? What programs should we be doing? So trucking has traditionally been an area of scarcity in training because it was such a pain to deliver training. People did the bare minimum. But when you move it online and you've got a kind of wide open world of opportunities, you have to think about not just what do we absolutely need to do? What is the reg change? Where's the person who needs a renewal on something? who is needing a distracted driving course because they just got a ticket for something. You have to move away from that and think about where do we want to get to? What would be the ideal for our fleet, and what is the education plan that will get us there? That is what you look at in terms of the learning management system. And then it becomes, okay, well, how is it going to work in our organization? What we were talking about earlier, as far as being able to have it match the org structure. And is it going to be something where we can easily get our drivers in there, new drivers added, keep it up to date? Is it going to be a pain to do all of that kind of day-to-day management? And then a little bit on the end, how is it going to talk to other systems? Because more and more that's become an issue in transportation as well. We have more back office systems that need to be talking to each other.
Yeah, and also the cameras. We have
Cameras are one good way
cameras
of doing
talking
that.
to the system, talking to
Yeah.
the HR system, so it all kind of,
And that's another example of kind of things we learned along the way, and the benefits of building the system from scratch specifically for trucking, that we can do things that you would never be able to do with an off-the-shelf system. And integrating with dashcam is absolutely a good example of that, because there's no off-the-shelf LMS that will integrate with the dashcam, because they don't really think about that. But in
yeah.
trucking, it's a huge issue. You have a camera video, you want to assign training based on that. Absolutely. You need to be able to do that easily. Or maybe it's not just online training, maybe it's practical training, maybe it's a classroom course, but all of that stuff needs to be tracked together.
Awesome. Is there anything before we wrap this up, because I think we're at time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about, your experience with an LMS?
It's really been very different. It's enjoyable to build these things, enjoyable to build out new function. I'm very happy to see post-COVID that the trucking industry has kind of made a big leap forward in technology. We don't really see the drivers with flip phones anymore. So smartphones have really become common, so that a mobile app can work for delivery of content, and people are getting much more comfortable with technology and able to take more advantage of it. So that's been cool. And it's allowed us to focus on adding things that are going to really be of benefit to the audience, that are very specific and purpose built. And we don't have time to go into those details of the things that are coming, but it's going to make a big difference in the experience for both drivers and administrators over the next 6 to 9 months.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, as time has passed, because our LMS is, I don't know, 15 years old, 20 years
More than
old.
that. Oh, yeah.
And, technology changes a lot. So and to have a system that still works for people, you have to keep changing it. And
Yep.
we are in the process of doing that. And if you're interested in that, I think we have other webinars that talk about, specific features and things like that. But um, we don't have time for this now. But I would like to thank you for joining me today. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Thank you very much, Mark. You did a fine job as a guest. And I just wanted to point out, for anybody who likes coming to these every month, we are going to be taking a break this month and January, because we are in the middle of Best Fleets to Drive For, and it's a slog. So we're going to focus on that, focus on finding your top 20 for 2025, and we will resume in February.